When VAR was introduced to the Premier League in 2019, it was broadly considered a step forward. In a game where referees come under pressure from players, fans and coaches, it was hoped that VAR would restore impartiality and make the game fairer for all. But, as is so often the case in football, it was a fruitless hope. In 2 years since the introduction of the system to football's highest tiers, VAR has not done away with debate over decisions, but merely changed the ground on which those battles are fought. And the legions of ex-pros who believe that football peaked in the 90s have been given constant ammunition for their attacks on the modern game by repeated mistakes and inconsistencies. Even worse, the claim that VAR would lead to correct decisions has raised already impossible standards for matchday officials, prompting refereeing organisations to take the unprecedented step of issuing apologies for red cards, penalties and blown calls, something unheard of in the pre-VAR world. However, now the system is here, it's here to stay, and so rather than calling for VAR to be scrapped, we need to find ways to improve its implementation and fulfill the technology's promise. But how can we fix it? And what would proposed changes do to the game? Let's find out. The first thing we have to acknowledge is that many of the criticisms of VAR are nothing to do with the system at all. At the time of writing, the Premier League is due to see around 20 more penalties this campaign than in any previous season, an uptick attributed by many to VAR's strict implementation of the handball rule. However, that's more a product of a nonsensical rule than VAR, with the laws on handball changed twice already this season, and the area of the arm above the sleeve recategorised as part of the shoulder, a confusing state of affairs which leaves refs as perplexed as the rest of us. It's also worth noting that VAR does seem to be having some effect on fairness. As things stand, the 2021 season would be the first since 2001-2 and only the second year in PL history when more penalties have been given to away sides than to home sides. And since VAR was introduced, exactly as many spot kicks have been given to teams on the road as to hosts. By comparison, the 5 previous years saw 275 penalties awarded to home sides and just 188 given to away ones, suggesting that refs struggle to ignore pressure from crowds. On the other hand, VAR has made some situations much worse, in particular the offside rule. The FA's current definition of that law is this. A player is in an offside position if any part of the head, body or feet is in the opponent's half, excluding the halfway line, and any part of the head, body or feet is nearer to the opponent's goal line than both the ball and the second last opponent. This formulation led to notorious decisions like the armpit offside, as seen in a game between Liverpool and Aston Villa back in 2019. As well as the now familiar line drawing exercises as the video assistant refs attempt to work out where the attacker's shoulder becomes the arm and whether it is marginally ahead of the defender's knee, a situation complicated by the fact that it is often impossible to work out the exact moment that the ball was played, even on video replays. Arsene Wenger, now FIFA's chief of global football development, has come forward with his idea of how to change things for the better, suggesting that instead, a player should be onside if any part of their body with which they can score is in line with the defender. So in this situation, it doesn't matter if almost all of the attacker's body is closer to the goal than the last defender, so long as a toe or shoulder remains in line with that opponent. And it's been estimated that such a rule change, the most drastic offside redefinition since 1925, would cut the number of offsides from 4 to 2 a game. But how would it change things? Well, firstly, it would likely lead to defences playing deeper, knowing that it's easier than ever for forwards to make runs in behind, and that could mean that attacking football would actually suffer, as even top sides become more conservative. And more importantly, it wouldn't actually change the length of VAR delays in any way. Decisions would still come down to fine margins, and the arm-shoulder distinction would still be hazy, meaning that we would still require line drawing, and instead of armpit offsides, we would get armpit onsides, as a striker's heel was in line with a defender's shoulder, for example. Even if you introduced a margin for error, like the 10cm channel some have suggested, there would still be cases right on the limit of that buffer zone. Essentially, we're having exactly the same debate, just in a different way. A simpler rule could be to modify the current law to only apply to feet. This would mean that a player could never be leaning offside so long as their feet were further from goal than the last defenders, and would speed up VAR decisions too, with the video ref only needing to focus on feet and not take into account other body parts like the head, shoulder, knee or armpit. There will still be close calls, and sometimes crosshair technology will be needed, but they'll be much rarer and easier to deal with. It also seems to be more in the spirit of the rules. A player running in behind a backline 30 yards from goal isn't really getting an advantage if his head or shoulder is further forward than the defenders. In our opinion, this would be the simplest solution, but unfortunately, offsides aren't the only issue. Just before we get into our next section, a quick reminder that if you're not subscribed to the channel, you absolutely should subscribe now. Hit the notification bell, you'll never miss an upload, and drop us a like if you're enjoying this video. One of the fundamental problems with VAR is that fans and refs disagree on its purpose. Fans think VAR is there to get decisions right, while refs think it's there to help them. This led to the idea that VAR should only overrule a matchday official if they've made a clear and obvious error, a law cooked up with the intention of correcting the most obvious mistakes while not embarrassing refs. This means that if a ref awards or does not award a penalty, it's presumed that this is the right decision unless there is undeniable evidence that it isn't. And as a consequence, bad decisions are allowed to stand. And when this principle comes into contact with rules which rely on a subjective interpretation, like handball, things get fuzzy very, very quickly. For example, in Arsenal's 1-1 draw with Burnley in March 2021, the Gunners were denied a penalty after the ball struck Eric Peters' arm in the area. The ref didn't give it and VAR didn't overrule him, a choice widely criticised by Arsenal fans. But how could VAR determine if there was a clear and obvious error when the handball rule requires officials to determine if the arm was in a natural position? One person's idea of a natural position will differ from another's, and so VAR is merely another opinion and couldn't say the ref was wrong. The larger problem is that this leads to inconsistency, with every group of fans able to point to examples of when laws were applied differently. And rather than the situation before VAR, in which everyone broadly accepted that some decisions would go their way and others wouldn't, it now means everyone is furious at injustice all the time. So perhaps the answer is more power for VAR, not less. As well as the ability to overturn the ref's decision if there's a clear error, the ref could tell VAR if he hasn't seen an incident clearly enough, and allow the video officials to make the choice for him, or VAR could simply overrule the ref whenever they wanted, given that the ref is one man and VAR can have multiple people review the footage. That would prevent the post-match apologies and remove the need for refs to jog over to the sideline and look at a screen. Again, something which slows the game down and puts even more attention on individual calls. As we've seen, VAR isn't perfect, but right now its situation is being made worse by everything from bad rules to speed of execution. And perhaps the greatest casualty of the system is the flow of the game. Where football is meant to be fluid and end-to-end like basketball, it now feels broken up and piecemeal like cricket or American football. By tweaking its application and finding ways to make the whole process quicker, we can make VAR feel like part of the game rather than a suspension of it, and make the sport fairer for all while keeping its essence intact. Time will tell whether the game's lawmakers are capable of getting us there. So that's our take on how to improve VAR, but how would you make the system better, or would you scrap it altogether? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to never miss a video. We'll see you next time.